What if Nutella was a high-end luxury product? Hey, I'm Ace, founder of Quadro, and with the team we usually love doing this quick creative exercise to keep our skills sharp. In this video, we're gonna take on a challenge. We're branding Nutella as a luxury product. Let's break down the entire process with Ray, co-founder and our 3D lead.
Since this is mainly for social content, we're starting with a quick mood board on Miro and basically trying to collect references that resonates with our concept, the idea, and the script that we have in mind. Miro board is a tool that we can use. It's you can visit the link in the description. It basically lets you gather references and put it in one place, and you can share it with other people working on the same project. So it's really powerful because you guys can kind of brainstorm using Miro board. You can even draw and kind of basically present your idea to the entire team. So this is our Nutella mood board. There were more images here earlier, but it's quite important that you kind of filter out the references, or what we call key references, to better understand the kind of look that you're going for. So for example, I made sure to keep the original Nutella design because we want it to be still grounded to that same idea. But from other images, we'll take elements like, for example, this lid that I really like the gold on, and there's this detail of its branding or logo on the top. So I want to take that idea, and the jar on the upper right, I kind of like the design, so I kind of mix both. So again, references are very important. And from that, since we have a really strong script already, what's important is having a good storyboard. Now, a good storyboard doesn't necessarily mean that you need very beautiful drawings or really detailed drawings. No, the purpose of a storyboard is to kind of visually show you the script, the flow of the entire thing. So as long as you and your team understand what the storyboard is showing you, that's what's important. So the storyboard will be kind of our guide throughout the whole thing for the animation, as well as what models that we need to model. Because if you really think about it, what we see in frame are the only things that we need to model. So it also informs you of what things you can compromise on in terms of modeling, in terms of lighting, in terms of animation. So storyboard is very important. Can you start your animation without a storyboard? Absolutely. But when you're working with a client, especially a client that's not really used to how productions work, it's important to take them through that journey and the step-by-step process, and showing them that this is how your product will be visualized. And it's easier to do it on 2D because then you're not committed yet into modeling it and to, lighting it and animating it. It just takes lesser time. It's more of a, quick way to show your client the flow of your entire animation. So for 3D modeling the Nutella jar, I usually always start with blocking. So for this instance, I'm using Blender to do my initial blocking. And on the lower left of the screen, you'll see my references that I picked out from our Miro board. But this time I'm using what's called PureRef. You can check the link in the description. And basically what it does is it lets you gather your references and overlay it on your software or over your software. So it's quite useful. So now I usually try to plan how to approach my modeling and try to think of the steps that I'm going to take. That way, I spend lesser time experimenting or going back and forth. The goal here is to get the initial shape of the jar that I'm going for. And I'm not so worried about the topology or if it's optimized, because again, like we established, this is for social content and I know that the asset won't be reused. So it's good to know where you can compromise and, spend time where it matters. So modeling this like the traditional way or the clean way isn't really a top priority. But of course, if this was for a client and I know that the client will be using this asset for a different video or reuse it for somewhere else, then obviously I would have spent more time on, on the modeling. So after I do my initial blocking here in Blender, we'll then shortly jump to ZBrush and finish the form, sculpt the details, any additional adjustments that we might need for the model.
Now, the first jar design didn't feel right. It felt like kinda cheap. But by thickening the jar walls, we give it a stronger, more premium presence. Products with thicker or heavier materials often feel more substantial, stronger, which subconsciously communicates that it lasts, that has a long durability, has quality, and gives a lot of value to the consumer. For the lid, we added some details to emphasize quality. These small touches elevate the product's perceived value. In this case, details always matter, especially with high-end products. If we think about it, artisan products in particular emphasize these qualities because they're often handmade or produced in smaller quantities, focusing so on quality, while industrial production usually focuses more on efficiency.
And I've exported it from Blender as an FBX and imported it. Here, I'm just gonna focus on trying to get the final form of the jar that I want. You know, I just find ZBrush less restrictive in a way. It's not, like I mentioned earlier, it's not really the most optimal way of modeling, but again, we're compromising for the benefit of time and reaching the deadline. And I will tell you that you will always run into those decision making that you have to do. And with experience, you'll understand where you can take shortcuts, where you can kind of, you know, compromise. And ZBrush does a perfect job of helping you freely model and concept your modeling or your sculpting. So as you can see here, I'm trying to adjust the shape, I'm trying to evaluate the entire design, and I'm trying to also try out some new ideas that I might have along the way. And from here, we'll obviously jump back into Blender, and to make it a little more manageable for Blender, we will do a process called decimation. And what it does is it basically tries to, you know, re-topologize the model and convert it into tries. Again, the topology looks hideous, but the point here is it kept all of the details without me needing to export a displacement map or anything like that. The only thing I would recommend here is after you do your decimation and export it from ZBrush as an FBX, just check on the normals, because ZBrush has this way of storing its custom normals on your mesh after you export it, and Blender doesn't always read that really, you know, quite well. So just make sure to go to geometry data and just clear the custom split normal data. That way you get a cleaner result. So after making a few adjustments of the model, adding more details like the lines on the lid, adding the sculpting in that hazelnut logo on the lid and as well as the back of the jar, I then proceeded to do the decimation and then export on Blender. And for the actual logo and these graphics on the jar, I had our 2D team kind of make that for us, and all I had to do to bring it to Blender is add it as image planes. So when you do that, it already adds it as an alpha, it has an opacity and all of that, and I just added a shrink wrap modifier onto the jar. That way it contours to the jar perfectly, and so that I can easily move around the entire thing, I just parented everything into a curve, so a controller so to speak, and that way I can easily do my animations. And the cool thing about this is if you add it as image as planes, you can also easily add it separate materials if you want it to look a little different. Now I have a perfect plugin that I love using for what we call set dressing, and it's called Blenderkit. So Blenderkit is an amazing plugin. A lot of professionals use it. We use it in the studio. And what it does, it gives you access to a lot of high quality assets uploaded by creatives, and it's directly integrated in Blender. There's a free version that allows you access on some of the assets, but the premium version or the paid version gives you access to everything. So as you can see, you can access models, materials, entire scenes, HDRIs, and even brushes. So it's a really powerful tool, and I really recommend you get it or invest in it. Again, it helps you quickly do your set dressing or add elements to your scene. So for example, I want to add a bread here on the left side of our jar. So I just type in bread, make sure I'm under the modeling or model category, make sure the cursor is placed where I want the bread to be put, and just left click on it, and then boom, it's downloaded. Already set up with a principled BSDF most of the time. So all of the textures are already attached and you're good to go. So that's where I got hazelnuts here, the leaves, this knife, and even this tree stump. So again, it's very powerful, and you can check the description for the link. And yeah, the animation for most of the scenes for our luxury Nutella are very easy and straightforward. The last shot had the most moving elements, and for example, the assets we downloaded from Blenderkit, I added some subtle animation to it to kind of add some dynamic movements. And again, based on our storyboard, this is where your storyboard usually comes in really handy, is, you know, when you start doing your animation and shots. So we know that the start of the scene is a curtain swiping from screen right to screen left. So, and then we don't want our scene to look flat, so I added some movements to the smaller elements in the scene. So as you can see, I've done some animation on the other elements, and I'm just doing redoing one of the animations on one of the hazelnuts here. So I'm doing initial blocking, like keyframing the distance at first and then adding the rotation after, until I can get like a more natural movement out of it. And then again, just repeat the process and try to think of what subtle way you can animate your scene without it taking too much attention from the star of the shot, which is in this case the Nutella jar. And for the curtain, for the cloth simulation, I just basically used the in-engine cloth sim from Blender. It does a pretty good job, especially when you start adding some forces in the scene, like turbulence, some wind, and obviously animate the actual curtain. Or again, Blenderkit, you can download your model from Blenderkit, then add your cloth simulation. So that's the power of what Blenderkit can give you in such a short amount of time. And in this case, I just used a plane and modified it to have, you know, the cloth sim instead, because since I'm not really going to use it a lot or too much, and it's mostly going to be in the background, a simple plane would do the trick for me. So lighting in 3D is probably my favorite part of the production. For me, lighting is a very expressive process, and it really brings the whole scene to life. And I wholeheartedly recommend this TED Talk video that I watched a couple of years ago, and it beautifully explains how lighting in 3D kind of elevates your shot, elevates your scene, and brings everything to life. So please watch that. So for our Nutella jar, the lighting here, I wanted it to be dynamic and cinematic, and we don't want a lot of direct light sources, and I want some dramatic reveals and some good rim light. So I'm going to introduce a plugin here that I really love. It's not really a make or break plugin that you can't live without, but it really makes your life easier, especially if you do this a lot. So the plugin is called Wrangler. You can find the link in the description, and it makes it that when you add a light, you have these extra options on how to adjust and control the light. So check out Wrangler. They have very extensive tutorials on how to use it, and I fully recommend getting this one. So for me, the lighting, most of the lighting that we use here for our Nutella project is very basic 3-point lightings, but I always recommend using an HDRI, especially if you have, you know, reflections on your models, but to kind of crank down the intensity of your HDRI. You don't want it to kind of overtake your full control of your lighting. And then once you're done with the HDRI, you want to add your lights one by one. So in this case, you can add a rim light, a fill light, and then so on and so forth. Another thing I fully recommend and remind senior artists, including myself, because I often forget it, is to organize your scene all the time, especially if other people are going to work on your scene. If you're working on a full production, it's important that you have a system that you follow and make it cleaner for the next person who's going to use it. So in this case, for example, our lighting, you want to make sure that you put your area lights, your spotlights, and your point lights into one collection or one folder, and name them accordingly. So you can name your rim light as, for example, in what I'm trying to do here is called it rim_01 and rim_02, so on and so forth. Again, it's very important because even if not a lot of people are working on your scene, let's say a client wants to adjust this specific rim light on the left here, if you didn't name your lights, then you'd have to sort through each and every one of them just to find which light that is. So again, it's just a really good practice to do that. So before I do my final render, there's really no way to check your animation with lighting without rendering. So what I usually do is I do a lower res render so that I can just evaluate and see if there's anything wrong with the animation that I did, with the lighting that I did. So what I usually do is make the resolution into 50%. I usually crank up the noise threshold into 0.1, sometimes higher. And I also limit the max samples into 1024, and basically that's it. I turn on denoiser, and for animation I usually almost always actually use optics if you have that available for you. So this way you can kind of see how the entire thing comes together before you commit to those, you know, really long render times with 4K and the likes.
Now let's bring it all together. Let us know what you think in the comments and what product should we reimagine next. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more creative experiments. Bye!